Hey everybody, it's Nick from Iowa State University, and I got a tutorial for you today. That's a basic introduction to AutoCAD. And the way we're going to be doing it in this class is we're going to start by making a drawing of our studio in the King Pavilion. And you open up the file that's on Canvas that has the King Pavilion plans, and you can locate your studio. The way the drawing is set up is not true north, it's sight north. You can see that north is actually off in like a 45-degree direction. But for our purposes, it's going to make it easier to rotate it to that like sight north so that we can get 90-degree, really nice kind of vertical angles for things. So it's just going to make it easier to align things. And that's pretty common in architecture. Typically, when you do a site plan, you'll actually show true north, but when you're doing a building plan, it might help to align with something like a street or some other kind of datum, and that's what we've got going on here. So that's why that kind of north arrow is kind of facing like an odd direction, but it is mostly north. So we do get a sense of where light might be coming in, where the like western sun might be, like that sort of thing. So anyway, starting from that, you can locate your studio. You can tell where the doors are, the bathrooms are, the stairs. You can figure out somewhere within this space is your studio. And then you can start to locate where that is. What I'm asking you to do though is to actually eliminate parts of the drawing that you don't need and just to focus on your studio. And the first thing you're going to do, when you've got AutoCAD open, I basically just opened it up from like a fresh install. If you're looking at the bottom of the screen, you'll have a lot of stuff activated. Like these are your kind of options. I want you to go ahead and actually unclick a lot of these. Go ahead and make sure that like the like polar tracking is turned off, dynamic input is turned off. If it's blue, it's turned on, so we're going to turn it off. Turn off the line weights. They don't really work that well anyway. We're going to go ahead and turn off transparency. Let's see here. I got glitchy. Nope, no group selection. Annotations, nope. Polar angles or object snap tracking, no. The other ones we're going to have on, you can have ortho on, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Ortho mode, that's going to restrict things to 0 degrees, 90-degree angles. And then your object snaps, which is going to be more important later. But so go ahead and turn all those off. They're going to get in your way later. You should pretty much have the same kind of interface for properties that I do. If you don't, go ahead and click on My. That's your My Properties. If you look at, and we'll talk about this more in the other video if you've already seen it, but we're looking at the layers. I'm going to type in layers, and you can see how this is set up with the with like the class template with the different colors. So it should be set up the way that all of our files are. The other thing that I'm going to have you do early on is go ahead and take your command window. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to go ahead and move this. Make this a little bit taller, and then pull, see how it turns into that icon. I'm going to pull this to be wider. This is so I can read what the commands are doing, and it's just going to make it easier for me to kind of understand what's going on with the tool. In some other videos you see me pull it out, but this is a new version, and I guess it just kind of stays docked here for now. There's probably a way to move it, but I'm not finding it right now. Okay, so anyway, this is going to be really important in just a bit. So now that you've got your kind of space set up, and you're sure that everything is working right, I'm going to teach you how to move around the interface. You've kind of seen me do this already, but I want to tell you what's happening. So zoom is usually your mouse wheel. You can also zoom by using the Z, just by pressing the Z key, and that's going to bring up the zoom tool. And then you can just press on your keyboard like the enter key, and then that gives you a lot of options here. That you can zoom everything by saying A for all. So just type in A. Usually just have to type the first letter of each command. And as you get to work with AutoCAD, you'll get more and more used to it. So that's again like Z, A real quick. Okay. You can also do zoom, W for window, and then you can draw a window, and it will zoom into that window. So that's nice. But most of the time, I just use the mouse wheel. And that's why it's handy for you to have a mouse that has a wheel, and I think most of them do these days for scrolling. If you don't, you're going to want to go ahead and use those zoom commands. But zoom all is really useful. ZA is really handy. You've also got, and I don't use these ever, but I believe that there's also some tools up here. Yeah, you can use the zoom tools, so real-time zoom, window, all extents. Okay. So that's handy too. Extents is the extent of the drawing space. All is all visible objects. So both of those are differently useful for different reasons. So anyway, those are tools that you have available. I don't typically use the menu bar. I don't typically use the icons. I do a lot of my work just by typing things in with my left hand on the keyboard and my right hand on the mouse. People that are really efficient at AutoCAD, people that use it a long time, that's pretty much what they do. It's much faster to use the keyboard to activate commands and then use the mouse to point at things than any other method. And so I really encourage you to practice that and get good at it. You'll also notice there's a zoom kind of icon up here, and that allows you to kind of use your left mouse button to zoom in and out. The other thing I do a lot of is panning, and pan means just to move the screen, move things around. That is accomplished by holding down the middle mouse button by default. If you don't have a middle mouse button, you can just type P for pan, and now you're in pan mode. To get out of a command, you can press the escape key. In this case, with the pan command, you can also press enter, and that will stop the command. Another thing that's important to know is that if you want to activate the last command that you used, you can press on the enter key. I guess it's called like return on Macs, but it's the same principle. These commands are the same no matter what version of AutoCAD you're using. And there are also a lot of commands that overlap in a program called Rhino that we're going to be using later in the semester. So it's good to get a hand of these. Okay, so panning, zooming, all that. That's most of how you can navigate the drawing. Okay, so the other thing you're going to do is start to erase, lines for things. And so you want to get to understand how to make sort of like selections by clicking and dragging. Actually, you don't actually click and drag. I apologize. You actually click, and then you can move the mouse, and you typically go from the bottom right-hand corner to the top left-hand corner. And so you just click and move, and then whenever you click in the other corner, it selects all the objects that are there. And that's how you select. If you want to get out of a selection, you press escape. If you want to take something out of a object selection, you can hold shift, and then you actually click on something, and that'll actually deselect that object. So that's kind of interesting. And if you want to add to it, you just click. So click to add, shift to unselect. And then you can get really precise with how you select things. To erase things, you can just press delete. You can also press E for erase. And as you notice, whenever I activate a command, you can see different options come up here. And that's really important too. A lot of times it'll tell you what to do, or it'll tell you what you can do. So like when I did zoom, it was like, all zoom center, zoom dynamic, zoom extents, zoom previous, zoom at a certain scale. So there's all these different options here. You press the first letter or the capitalized letter, and that's how you activate that tool's option. So Z and then A for all, right? So let's assume that I'm in this nice bright corner studio here, and I can start to erase, a lot of the objects that I don't need. This is the coordinate plane here, this little y-axis here. This is considered to be 0, 0. Like remember back in high school math when you have the coordinate plane. So x in the positive is here, and y in the positive is in this direction, and you can assume the space in the drawing starts at the coordinate space 0, 0. You can see down here there's a readout of where I am inside of the drawing coordinates. So if I'm like up here, you can see at the bottom it's like 115 feet, 111 feet. That's useful if you know what that datum is. A lot of times you don't necessarily need it. The scale for this drawing, let me go back, let me make sure. When you're working with your drawings, you want to go to units, make sure that you're in architectural units. Sometimes you're in decimal and that's metric. It's really important because this is how we're going to be able to input different measurements for things. And you want to be using a scale that you understand, inches and feet, obviously. So we're going to make sure the units are set to architectural, which in this case means imperial units. The other thing that it's important to know is that when you make a drawing, when you're drawing in CAD, you're making a drawing that's in real space dimensions. So 3 feet is 3 feet. Even if the drawing you're going to print later on might be at a 1/4 inch equals a foot scale, or 1/2 inch equals a foot scale, or some scale. It's not the real scale, right? It's always going to be some kind of fraction of it. You make the drawing in CAD at the actual dimensions, no matter what, okay? Whether it's a mile long or it's only an inch long, you draw it at that scale, and you use those units. Don't do any unit conversion in the drawing. That's what the layouts are for. When we go to make a drawing actually to print, you will determine what that scale is, okay? So that's really important. This drawing is, like 100 foot is 100 foot. So go ahead and start to clean things up a bit. I'm not gonna erase everything in this drawing here, so we can kind of keep things moving along. But so that's really important. Okay, so then we're gonna start drawing. Drawings are usually done with the line tool. Most things in architecture start off as lines. You'll notice that everything in the drawing is on the same layer, as I talked about in the other video. In order to put things onto layers to give them line weights, you want to select them, and then you can change their layers. I am going to leave it up to you to determine what layer, what line weights things need to be based on the spatial hierarchy. But you need to be thinking about that in reference to the other drawing that we showed you, and which colors and which line weights were used to define which kinds of objects. You want to think about how the drawing reads spatially, like what is thick, or what is important, and what is less important. So the walls, obviously are going to be critical. The structure, the columns, the windows will be there, but they're less important. And then to the furniture, and so on and so forth. You might think about furniture that's permanent, such as these lockers, versus furniture that can be moved, like your tables and chairs. So anyway, line tool. So to activate the line tool, you press L, and then it says specify a point. So the way the line tool works is you make a point, and then you just click the mouse, and it'll keep drawing until you press the enter key or the return key. I'm actually going to make my stuff on a different layer, because it's harder to see. Okay, so this is on the red layer for now. A tactic you can do too is draw everything on layer 0 and then put them on to layers once you kind of understand what your system is. That's a little bit more time consuming, but that might work for you now. Otherwise, you can just say, okay, I know what layer this is on. I'm going to draw all these desks, with green or red or something. Again, I'll let you figure that out. But that's how you draw just a simple kind of line. But of course, that line doesn't have any measurements. We don't know how big it is, So one thing you could do, well, I'll say 2 things. You can start to use lines, and I'm actually going to go into the non-plot layer, and I'm going to use that to define kind of a grid. So I've got my my object snaps here, and you can see, like, as I kind of start to touch something, you can see these things light up and they turn green, and that's the different kinds of snaps that we have. And a snap lets you make a connection with a line, with another line, and it makes things accurate. So they can be really useful. You don't have to line things up, and you basically turn them on and off by choosing the icons. And these are off, now they're on. And if you right-click on them, you can turn off and on different snaps. And I will say, you should leave as few snaps on as possible, because the more snaps you have, the more your cursor jumps around. You might accidentally make something that you don't want. So I typically go with midpoint, endpoint. Now I've got some circles here, so I might actually want the quadrants of the circles. And I'll probably want perpendicular snaps as well. So that's going to allow me, these circles are not a really true circle. So I'm gonna draw a line across here, and then I'm going to use that to define a midpoint. And then I'm going to intersect that midpoint with this box. And I would start by maybe drawing for yourself what the bounds of your studio are. And that is really, I'm using the centers of things, and that's a really architectural thing as well. We always kind of draw things on center. That's how things fit together most of the time. So you can draw lines like that. And what I actually have the orthographic snaps on. Orthographic again just means that things snap at 90-degree angles from each other, and that just keeps things. Since this thing is rotated at 90 degrees, everything is aligned. I can turn that off and on. Right now, it's kind of handy. You can also click a line, and then you can click on the edge of it, and then you can snap it to a new point, and that just kind of stretches it. So that's kind of cool. I'm going to use this to trim the edges. Trimming is another command that's really useful. So trim is just, if I have a line, so it says select objects, so I'm going to select the objects that I want. Actually, yeah, I'm going to select the trimming object. And then when I'm done with the objects I'm using to trim, I press enter. And then anything that I sweep gets cut, basically. So I'm going to do that again up here. And practice this. Okay, so I've selected it. Now I can just cut these, and you can cut them by clicking, or you can cut them by dragging. Dragging is often really useful. And then I can go ahead and delete all these. And this method is really precise and useful. Another thing that we use a lot is called fillet, and a fillet is just basically taking two lines and making an edge with them. And you can just type F for fillet, and you take an object and another object, and it will bring them together. I'm gonna go ahead and actually undo that. In Mac, it's you hold down like Command Z, that'll undo the command. On PC, it's Control Z. I'm gonna change it. So the fillet tool has a radius, that's R, and you can specify units. I'm gonna say like a 1 foot radius. It's a big radius. This is typically what fillet is used for. You take two edges and it makes a rounded corner. That's really what filleting is for, but a trick that a lot of architects use is that you use fillet to quickly bring two lines together with a corner. So we're going to do fillet radius R 0 for the radius, and that will allow you to quickly join those together for a trim, if you like. I'm actually going to go ahead. I could, if I wanted to, trim. This box here. But that's typically not what we do. I mean, what I would actually do, I kind of messed this up here, but I would actually leave the box around. And I would just trim. I would trim this. I'm actually going to go back to what I had. So this way, I can tell that is still going, but it's like permanent. It's in the space. I'm just going to leave it though. If I trim both the bottom and the top of, the side and the bottom of it off, I don't have any sense of it as an object. This is still kind of continuing to define that space a bit. And in fact, since I did this cut here, I'm going to go ahead and draw another line. So I'm just going to draw a line. I'm going to erase this anyway, so it doesn't matter if it overlaps, but I'm going to go ahead and stretch these down too. Just gonna move this there. And really, so those are kind of guidelines that I've got. So the reason why I'm using this color and I'm using these guidelines is because I'm going to take measurements to kind of figure out like where the desks are in the space or where the other furniture is, and then I'm going to use that to determine where they are. But first thing I'm going to do is maybe draw a desk. And there's a couple different ways to do that. The easiest way to do it is actually go over to the rectangle tool, and it says specify first corner. So I can just draw a corner, and then it says specify the area or the dimensions of the rotation. We're going to go D for dimensions and the length of the rectangle. Well, we know that that's going to be, the desks are 30 inches by 60 inches. So we can do 30 because the units by default are inches. So 30. The other way you could do it is to say that the width of it is 60 inches. You could also say that's 5 feet. So 5 and then the little sort of like apostrophe 5 feet, 5 foot. So there you go. So you can do dimensions in inches. You can do dimensions in feet. You can also do dimensions in feet and inches. So I could have done 5 foot with a little like apostrophe, 5 inches, and then with the quotes. So for example, Same thing. I could go dimensions. I could say 30 inches. And I could say, well, actually, I go back and do that. That's actually what they wanted me to do. So I could say 2 foot 6 inches. Oops, I made it the same in both dimensions there. Okay, one more time. Dimensions: 2 foot 6 inches by 5 foot. Now those dimensions are already in there too, and I actually have to press. I actually have to press the Enter key too when I'm done, or it doesn't stop the command here. Oops. Keep closing the command before I'm done. There you go. So I just had to actually do like a mouse click there to set it. So he doesn't know which side I want it on. You either have to click on the left or the right side for it to build it. So I'm going to go ahead and put these on some layer. And again, I don't know if this is the right layer or not. You have to figure that out. But I've got my desk, and depending on your measurements, I mean, you could say like, okay, I drew this measurement, and I know that I want my desk to be 2 foot away from that wall. Well, we do this really often, so we want to move something or have something that's next to something. A quick way to do that is to offset something that we have. So O is offset, and then you say distance, and the distance in this case is going to be, let's say, 2 foot. And I can click on this, and then you can see I can either offset it in one direction or the other. I'm going to offset it in that direction. And then I could go ahead and draw another line somewhere. And I could say offset. And maybe I want that one to be offset 1 foot 4 inches. Again, you'd have to kind of take measurements, but it's pretty good. I got away from that column there, let's say. I'm just saying this for example. And then you could go ahead and make a copy of your desk from the corner. Oh, I need to change my snaps here. I need the intersection of that corner. And if the ortho is getting in your way, you can just turn it off. And you can turn it off by doing function 8 or F8 on your keyboard if you're using a PC. So that puts that desk right there. So that's one way to kind of get something, if you know where it's supposed to be. That is not where I would probably put that desk, but let's just say if you know where those dimensions are, that's one way to quickly take an edge, use your guidelines, and then use that to copy something. We would typically actually put a desk on center, with a line again, so I might do that. So another command, so I showed you how to do copy. Move works very similarly, so just type in move. You take the point which you want to move it. In this case, it's the midpoint of that desk, and I'm going to move it to the intersection of that line. Oh, I like that position even better. Wow. So now I've moved that desk on center. We know that the desks are 3 foot. Well, actually, I guess they're 2 foot 6 inches. And we know that the space between desks is typically 5 foot from desk to desk. So we could do something where, like, let's put them 8 feet on center. So I could say offset 8 foot. And then I'm going to go ahead and offset that line again. And let's say I want to do another, row of these or something. And we know that we've got our desks maybe in bigger rows. So I might say copy. And you can keep copying until you finish the command. So you just keep using the mouse to click things, and then you press return when you're done. Copying is one of the most valuable things that you can do in CAD or in any software. Copies are free and they're fast. And so many things that we work on as architects are basically the same thing, that we just keep reusing them. So always use a copy. Like, try not to redraw things if you don't have to, or make a copy of something and modify it. That's a really powerful ability of using the computer. That architecture used to be all drawings, with pens and paper and like drafting boards. The real advantage of CAD, really starts to come in when you have this like precision and the ability to, quickly kind of change scale, and the ability to copy. Once we really got into those systems, there was no going back. And so, CAD is a really critical tool for us when we're making space, and when we're talking about space. So I've got that copy, and then I can go ahead and I can copy these objects now to on center, right? And if I was really smart, maybe I'd draw the desk with a chair first and then copy all those. But then I've got that. Well, I could have my desks like back to back, right? So I could go ahead and make a copy of my desks. That's pretty good. I did kind of mess up my spacing though from before, so now I've got to think about what that looks like. Well, if I know what my spacing is, I can make a copy from here over to here, and I don't need guidelines, right? And that design actually kind of fills out the space really well. Now again, you're going to be measuring where your desks are and making the drawing. But I'm just kind of showing you, like, this is what's really powerful about these copy tools, is that, you know, if you kind of understand that and you get the measurements right here, there's no need to remeasure. There's no need to look for that. So that's extremely handy. And, you know, at some point I could keep my things on my cyan layer and then I could remove them, or I could manually remove them. Either way. But that starts to be kind of clean. Now, for other things like chairs, or if you want to add the detail of the vertical kind of element for each desk, like that would help you kind of understand the space. I'm going to leave that up to you, but that's basically how you can do some of the things. The other thing I want to show you, though, I guess with lines, I haven't really talked about is if you want to draw. I've shown you kind of how to start a line from an edge and how to stretch it, you know, how to offset it. What if you want to draw a line that's a specific length? So you start by drawing a point. And then it says specify next point. Now, you could type in the coordinates if you actually knew what the coordinates were in the space, but that doesn't really work for us. So let's say we want a line that's actually, you know, 9 feet long or 10 feet long. So you would go put the little email symbol in there. And then you could say 10 foot 0. So just like your coordinates in your high school geometry class, on the x coordinate, you're going 10 foot, and the y coordinate, you're going 0. And then when you press enter, it's going to set a point. So now if I stop the command there by pressing return, I have a 10-foot line. Okay. If I wanted a line that's 5 foot tall, I would say at 0, 5 foot. And now that puts one of those in that space. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. But between that and offset and all the other things, you should be able to do a reasonably precise drawing, even though you don't have a lot of practice with it yet. And that's really the key. This is a lot for some folks. Some people maybe had CAD already in school, maybe in a high school drafting class or something like that. It's a little different, but you'll be spending a lot of time with it, and you'll have a lot of people around who are also doing the same thing. And if you practice and you ask for help, it's not hard. Everybody's managed to do it before. It's not. It seems really complicated, but you pretty much only use about 5% of the tools that you see here. There really isn't a lot to what we need. But what I've shown you right now is kind of a good way to give you the basics. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is actually how you start to set it up for printing, because we're going to print these to look at them. So like I talked about in the other video, you're going to go to the plot command. It should already be set up with the class plot style table. If it's not, that's a problem. I'm actually going to go into the layout. I have an 11x17 layout. It's already set up. You can see here, like, look at this. It's actually kind of small right now. We're in the layout view. We need to look at a scale. We need to choose a scale for the drawing. Every drawing has a scale because you can't print a drawing that's the same size as the space that you're going to build. It just makes sense, right? Plans are smaller than the thing. You need to find a way, though, to convert that drawing to real space, and that's why we have drawing scale. Typical scales that you'll see would be like 1/16 of an inch equals a foot. That means every inch on that drawing equals 16 feet. You could say, and then there's other ones like 1/4 inch. That means every inch is 4 feet, so that's a drawing that's zoomed in quite a bit. Then there's other drawings of details that are like an inch equals a foot, and those are huge. And let me show you what that looks like actually in the drawing here. So I'm going to go ahead. This is paper space again. We are looking at a piece of paper. If we're saying that, like, if I printed this 11x17, this is what you would see. Okay. In order to figure out the scale and in order to set a scale, you click on the layout window. That's this here. This is kind of a window into the model. You can see that the drawing itself, the layout window, is on the non-plot layer. That's that's on purpose. That is so that the edge does not print. You do not get a line around your drawing. You don't want that. All your drawing templates are set up this way, so you shouldn't have to worry about it. So I'm going to click on that. And if I go down to the bottom of the screen, you can see this little readout over here. This is the viewport scale. I can set this now to the actual scale. So if I set it to, let's say, 1/16 of an inch. So what I actually had was close to 1/16 of an inch. That is a thing that we typically do for like space planning or for site plans. It's way zoomed out, right? So if I'm, and what I did was I actually did a double click in the window. That lets me kind of pan around in that window. I can also do zoom center, and that will center the what's inside of the drawing. There you go. And so you just pick a point and it's going to center it. So you can see those is way zoomed out. If I do a double click outside of it, see it turns off. So now I can move around. I'm not inside the drawing. If I double click and I zoom, I am in the model. So this is like a window into the model, and that's going to change our scale, and I don't like that. So we're not going to do that right now. We need to be using this to set our scale. Otherwise, this is going to set some weird scale that doesn't really make any sense. Architects expect things to be at a scale. You put the scale on the drawing, and then the designer that you're working with understands what you're talking about. If you give me this drawing and you say this is 1/16 scale, this is like a city. It's like a huge tower and like a street. If you give me a drawing and say this is at 1/16, then I understand that this is part of a building here, right? And you typically wouldn't do this anyway, because look at all the white space. There's not a lot going on other than this here. The other thing that I want to talk about for scale is the level of detail that you see. Looking at this drawing, see what happens to some of these fine details. They kind of smush together and we kind of lose them. You've got to make the drawing in CAD for the scale that you're going to be printing. I know I said you make a drawing at 1:1 scale, but that means that you still draw it at 1:1 scale, but you don't want to draw a lot of extra detail that you don't need, or that's going to confuse people about what's going on in this drawing. So for example, again, the windows kind of smush things together. If I go back to my model, you can say, wow, that I don't really need all that in there, right? So a way to represent a window when you're representing them at these like larger scales is just simply to draw a line across the window. So centered, right? So that you can see here, and actually I did it as it's kind of a color that you can't really see, but I'm just going to do this for visibility. I'm not suggesting this is the line weight, but so you can see that like you read that now as an opening. I mean, it still has a little window in there, right? But at 1/16 scale, it's communicating the space better. We don't just take a drawing that is at full scale and then just zoom out. It doesn't work. It's wrong. It doesn't look good. So you got to think about it as you're drawing it. And that's why I'm talking about the layout right now, is to say what scale would we use to communicate our studio layout? And then how do we, work on that drawing, maybe redrawing elements or editing them so that we can communicate our space better. So let's look at it. That's 1/16 scale. That is not appropriate. Let's go to 1/8 scale. Now you can see there's these weird kind of 3/32, 3/16. Let's avoid those as much as possible. The reason why is because, again, like I said before, architects expect things at a certain scale. 1/16, 1/8, 1/4, 1/2, things that are fractions are very easy to understand because they're all halves of each other or quarters. 3/32 is weird. If you tell me that like I have a foot, or sorry, if I have an inch on a drawing, and I can't figure out how many actual feet that is. If you tell me it's 1/16 equals a foot, I know that it's 16 foot to the inch. So, but they exist because sometimes you do need them. But right now, and as much as possible, I would avoid them. So we'll go to 1/8, and that's going to double this. You can say, okay, That looks a little bit better. But what I'm seeing here in my drawing, though, is still a lot of white space. Still, I can't really resolve a lot of detail in this drawing. And I could, right? Because I have this whole piece of paper. And that's what I'm asking you to do. So let's go up to quarter scale. That's starting to look a little bit better. I can start to, I have, still a lot of white space on the edges, but maybe that's where I put the scale. Maybe that's where I put the north arrow. I can start to see some detail in these windows a little bit, so that's pretty good. So you can say like this maybe starts to be an appropriate level of detail for the scale in that drawing. So that's not too bad. So, 1/4 scale. And you can say, okay, well, maybe I go up to half scale. What does that look like? Well, now I'm losing some stuff, right? If I start to pan around here, I get a lot more detail in these windows, though. That's really nice, and in this window. But I can't see the whole studio space. And I don't know. It depends on how much space you have. It depends on what you're trying to show. Like if I was really interested in this corner condition, I might zoom into here, maybe at 1/2-inch scale. But in this case, it's probably not great. So you'd say, well, how would I center the drawing? Well, one kind of trick that I would have is to say, if I make a square, and I would probably measure this better, but make a square, draw a diagonal across it, and then I can say zoom center, and the center is going to be the midpoint. It's not going to let me do that. No. Well, no, if you mark the midpoint of that, you could use that to center your drawing. And the zoom scale is basically going to be whatever the whatever like the default is. Just go ahead and use that. I don't know why it didn't snap there. I kind of messed up, but that's one way. That's a kind of a cheap kind of method there for sort of making that work. I know, because I wasn't actually. Was I in the space? Center. Nope, didn't matter. Okay. I don't know why that didn't work. But anyway, that's and then I drew these inside the model space, so I'm gonna just erase them for now. Okay, double click. Very important not to zoom when you're inside of that thing, because you can see that just breaks my zoom. Okay. I'm gonna undo that. Cool. So then we go to plot, and then just make sure that and I would say 11 by 17. If you don't have a page set up for 11 by 17, I think I think I explained that in another video. But basically, you're gonna go set it up for ANSI B 11 by 17. And then you just say scale 1:1. Don't scale the line weights. Always put the scale as 1:1. Make sure you print line weights and print with plot styles. And again, if you don't see the line weights showing up, and you don't see them looking correct, then you've really got some work to do. But this will give you a start for the assignment and get you kind of introduced to the basic commands. You're going to go ahead and plot that PDF and then print that PDF upstairs at the output center. And then we can start to look at your drawing and sort of give you some red lines. But that'll get you started on this, and just with a few basic tools. There's some other videos that I'm going to give you that give you some of the advanced commands. I want you to go ahead and watch those, even if you're not going to need them right away. You may want some of them, for example, the arc tool and some of the polyline tools for drawing your desk chairs, if you decide to draw chairs, or if there's any other sort of items in the room that you want to represent. So that'll be useful. But practice, talk to each other, and I think you'll do great. All right, I will see you in class. Thanks.